CARICOM, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow, tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices and sing of your courage. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound of victory drum. Oh, CARICOM, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow. Tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices and sing of your courage. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound of victory drum. Oh, CARICOM, hele, hele, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow, hele, tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound of victory drum. Oh, CARICOM, hele, hele, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow, hele, hele, tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound of victory drum. Oh, CARICOM, hele, hele, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow, hele, hele, tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound of victory drum. Oh, CARICOM, hele, hele, wow, oh, for your sting, CARICOM, wow, hele, hele, tabo, yeah, tabo, wow, knock your drum, CARICOM, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrating song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for CARICOM. Hele, hele, bravo. Oh, pour you sing CARICOM. Leve, leve, wow. Hele, hele. Tabu, yeah, tabu, wow. Knock your drum, CARICOM. Leve, leve, wow. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrating song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for CARICOM. Hele, hele, bravo. Oh, pour you sing CARICOM. Leve, leve, wow. Hele, hele. Tabu, yeah, tabu, wow. Knock your drum, CARICOM. Leve, leve, wow.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to welcome you all to our first webinar, Youths Driving the Energy Transition. This is part of the Energy Month celebration for 2024. Today, we are joined by a group of remarkable leaders who will share with us their inspiring journeys in the pursuit of sustainable energy solutions. Throughout the discussions, participants will gain insight into the motivations, the challenges, and accomplishments of our young people in the energy sector. These young trailblazers will also present their visions for the future energy, and they will offer guidance to fellow advocates. They will also discuss actions that they are currently taking to guide and to secure and help to create a cleaner and more sustainable energy future. Today we have with us our moderator is Ms. Dorval Barzi, and she is no stranger to the region. She is an advocate in sustainable energy and also for climate change issues. Dorval is an environmental sustainability and climate risk consultant. In 2020, she founded the Climate Conscious podcast. She is dedicated to enhancing public awareness and amplifying the Caribbean perspective on climate action and sustainable development. With a background in energy and environment, Dorval brings over a decade of experience in areas such as environmental impact assessments, risk management systems, and sustainable energy policy. Dorval holds an MBA in Sustainable Energy Management and earned her BSc in Environmental and Natural Resources Management and Agribusiness from the University of the West Indies. She is actively involved in regional climate justice advocacy, hosting the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice conference and co-hosting the gender working group within the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. So welcome once again. Enjoy. Present your questions as we commence the discussions on this first webinar, Youths Driving the Sustainable Energy Transition. I now hand you over to Ms. Dorval Barsi. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Britton, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today as we kickstart CARICOM Energy Month 2024 with this first of the webinar series, Youths Driving the Sustainable Energy Transition. As Ms. Britton said, I am Durval Bazi, and I am thrilled to be your moderator for today's session. And the theme for CARICOM Energy Month is Invest in Sustainable Energy, Accelerate the Transition. And I truly believe that one of our greatest investments is in our human capital. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining. Please let us know in the chat where you are joining us from, across the region or even outside of the Caribbean region. So according to the Global Stocktake, achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement requires tripling renewable energy capacity and doubling in improvements in energy efficiency in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And for us here in the Caribbean, 1.5 to stay alive is much more than a slogan. It really is important for our lives and livelihoods. So as the region seeks to increase renewable energy capacity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also to enhance climate resilience, youth have a critical role to play in shaping a sustainable energy future. Youths are leaders, innovators, advocates, and change makers. Their voices, actions, and vision are essential to accelerating the global shift from fossil fuels to low carbon, clean energy sources. Again, supporting and empowering youth is one of the best investments we can make for our region and the world at large. So for today's session, we have a group of inspiring young leaders from across the region involved in various parts of the sustainable energy sector. Each of our panelists bring insights from their work, ranging from electric mobility to energy project development. So I encourage you to listen closely, ask questions, and think about how each of us, regardless of our roles, can play a part in the sustainable energy transition. So with that, I would like us to get straight into today's proceedings with our panelists who would each give us a brief overview of their career journeys, and then we will get into a Q&A session where you will also have the opportunity to ask your burning questions. So we're going to start today with Ms. Sophia Vital, and I'll share a bit of her bio, and then we allow her to tell us directly about her journey. So Ms. Sophia Vital holds a Master's of Science in Environmental Change and Management from the University of Oxford, and a BSc in Civil with Environmental Engineering from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Currently, she serves as a project development specialist and the Energy Working Group lead at the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, or 5Cs. And since joining the 5Cs in 2022, Sophia has played a pivotal role in securing funding from key climate finance institutions such as the GCF and USAID. Her previous roles included providing development support to renewable energy and energy efficiency projects at the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Sophia is also involved in organizations such as One Young World and the Women in Renewable Energy Network. Sophia will now give us a brief presentation on her career journey in sustainable energy. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Derval. Thank you for the introduction. So this morning, I just wanted to share a brief presentation on my career journey. And one thing I really want to pull out from my career journey is 7 lessons that I've learned along the way. And I hope for those of you who might be at the beginning of your journey or somewhere in between, that these lessons can resonate with you in some way. So just getting right into it. So I started my journey a bit unsure of what career I wanted to pursue. I sought career advice. So at the time in sixth form, I went to my physics teacher and I asked his advice, and he advised me to pursue civil engineering because I liked math, I liked sciences, I was good at them. And his rationale was that civil engineering was one of the broadest types of engineering. There would be lots of facets and different aspects of civil engineering that I could branch out off of if I wanted to. So I took his advice, and that is what I pursued. And the first lesson that I learned is if you're not sure, start with what you're good at. Following my bachelor's degree, I worked as a graduate civil engineer for about a year, focused on transportation engineering. So I was designing road alignments, road pavements, slope stabilization methods, and drainage. And while the job was technically challenging, something was missing for me. There was a connection that was lacking. And this is where I learned my second lesson. Sometimes what you're good at is not necessarily what you're passionate about, and that's okay. So then I had to reevaluate. And during this period of reevaluation, realizing that civil engineering wasn't exactly where I wanted to be, I started to explore environmental engineering and environmental management a bit more. During this time, I worked as a national project coordinator with the Basel Convention Regional Center on a waste management project. I volunteered with my local youth environmental organization, and I researched and applied for master's programs. And during this period, I learned, don't be afraid to pivot, explore new spaces and opportunities. So I was successful in obtaining a scholarship to study environmental change and management from the University of Oxford. And within this master's, one of the things that I really liked was how interdisciplinary it was. So I was able to learn quite a bit about climate change and what's needed for transformation to really react or to mitigate against climate change. So some of the modules, for example, Earth systems, human systems, governance of the Anthropocene, and of course, energy systems. And this really led me to sustainable energy, where my dissertation focused on this nexus between infrastructure development and climate change mitigation. And I looked at developing energy infrastructure development strategies for Caribbean countries. And so here I learned that your niche can often be found where what you're good at intersects with what you care about. And then I found myself in a position where I was almost restarting. And after completing my MSc, I really began to seek opportunities to gain experience in sustainable energy. Some of the things I did within my transition period, I worked as a fellow, a project development and finance fellow at Mandulis Energy, which is at the time was a renewable energy startup in Uganda. I worked as a research assistant short-term at the University of Oxford, researching net zero strategies, and I worked at the Secretary as an energy report card intern. I also volunteered a lot during this period. I completed lots of short courses as I really searched for full-time employment. And this lesson here that I learned was when you find what you want, pursue it head on. And then this led me to a space where I was able to secure a full-time position at the Secretary. I worked as a project development apprentice with the Regional Energy Apprenticeship Program. And then after I transitioned to a staff position, Junior Sustainable Energy Engineer. And I continued during this time to upskill. And the lessons I learned during this stage was diligence and consistency opens doors. And it's through this diligence, through this consistency, that I was able to transition and hold on to the opportunity when it was offered to me to work as a project development specialist at the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. And in my position at the 5Cs, I have really dived into developing climate change mitigation and adaptation projects for the region. I've been able to mobilize critically needed climate finance, and it has been extremely rewarding. And during this time, I've pursued continual learning. There's so much to learn within the field, particularly within climate finance and in the energy sector in that space. And the final lesson that I've learned is that combining what you're good at with what you love and what the world needs ignites a deeper drive. And that's really what I have experienced in my career journey so far. And I've learned that you have to keep going. It's a continual journey of learning, of seeking the place where your strengths and your values meet, of learning from every role and stage that you go through, and embracing your unique journey and not comparing your journey to anyone else's. So that is a very brief overview of my career journey so far. And I hope that any of these lessons would have resonated with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for that very insightful presentation. And, thank you for those 7 lessons, which I think will resonate with all of us. I think as young people navigating our professional journeys, sometimes there's a lot of pressure to have it all figured out. But as you have illustrated, it's a continual journey of learning, of discovering your strengths and aligning, your passions and what you care about. So thank you, and we'll hear more from you shortly. So now I would like to introduce to you Mr. Amir Dilawar. Amir Dilawar is an electrical engineer with a master's degree in electrical engineering and renewable energy systems from the University of Leeds, and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Guyana. He has experience in project management, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. Amir is currently serving as the program coordinator at Guyana Power and Light, Inc., leading the program execution unit for the Guyana utility scale solar photovoltaic program, GuySol, overseeing the deployment of utility scale solar PV infrastructure to support the country's low carbon development strategy. He's also an active member of Guyana's Association of Professional Engineers and the Institution of Engineering and Technology, UK, and has a background in academia, having lectured at the University of Guyana since 2013. Welcome, Amir.
Thank you, Derval. Good morning, everyone. Sapphire, thank you very much for those 7 lessons. I think even I can take some of those lessons at hand. As Derval would have mentioned, I am an engineer that usually operates in the space of policymakers. And I can tell you that that's an interesting position to be in. We think on a slightly different wavelength sometimes than some of our leaders do. We're a little bit more hands-on in our thinking, and sometimes that gives us benefits and some troubles. I wanted to explain to you today a little bit of what drives me in my journey as an engineer in this space. There is a Japanese concept of ikigai, and it's a simple thing, and it aligns nicely with what Sophia was saying before, that if you look at the 4 main aspects of life, it's about what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And these 4 concepts intersect at different stages. So for example, at the intersection of what you love versus what you're good at, you'll find your passion. And at the intersection of what you're good at and what you can be paid for, you'd find your profession. Ikigai is basically the intersection of all 4 of these things. And you hear this saying from time to time that if you do what you like, you don't work a day in your life, right? And there is truth to that. So finding that balance between what you're good at, what you love to do, what you can do to advance or help the world, and what you can do to sustain yourself individually and your families is something that a lot of us strive for. I myself started as a young person, my parents were not afforded the opportunity of secondary education. And what that meant is that they had this extra drive of ensuring that their children would be able to afford an education as far as possible. So going into secondary school, my father is a mechanic. He's a hands-on guy. So we always had this natural inclination to technical things. And in secondary school, I would have been gravitated towards the technical subjects. I even did food and nutrition because that was considered a technical subject in the CXC system. Finishing secondary school, I couldn't tell you then that what I'm doing now is what I expected to do. I went to the university being very attracted to physics and liking physics as a field, but encountered a difficulty in that the University of Guyana at that time did not really have a program for physics as a bachelor's. And what that caused me to do is to look at facets of that specific science and to see how I can fit what I think I want to do in the future into what is available. And engineering came up, obviously, as the very next thing. I looked at civil engineering and I said, look, I can't estimate distances, and that's going to be a big problem for me. And I ended up becoming an electrical engineer, and the journey has led me to the point where, I have a master's in electrical engineering, specializing in renewable energy systems. I started immediately after my bachelor's, I went into the university as a lecturer. And while I've been lecturing even since 2013 to now at the university, I felt the need after a few years of spending time at the university lecturing things like engineering, mathematics. Some of my students still to this day, when we cross paths, hail me up. The need to have more of a hands-on approach to this whatever I'm doing became, dire, and I decided to join the utility as a management trainee. As fate would have it, I started the GPL management trainee program in 2015, and I was halfway through when I was successful in attaining what is known as a Chevening Scholarship to study in the UK. So I had to leave my management trainee program to pursue my master's studies, and of course, that brings its own set of experiences. And if any one of you is undertaking a master's today and you're at the point of doing your thesis, anyone who has done a thesis can tell you that all you need to do is keep going. Sometimes imposter syndrome gets the best of us, and we feel as if we're not quite where we want to be, but we just have to bunker down and remember that we are good enough at what we're doing, or we would not have gotten that far. Finishing the master's, I returned to Guyana and I rejoined the utility, this time in the project management department. And this was sometime around 2017. And at that point in time, the utility was changing. In Guyana at that time, we were starting to see things like rooftop PV systems, and there were approaches about the deployment of solar farms and other renewable energy initiatives that the utility at the time was being faced with that was completely new to them. So I was lucky enough, I should say, that I was working with a team in the project management department and colleagues from the system planning department of GPL that were up to the task of trying to adapt a utility that is always been traditionally, fossil fuel based to one that is renewable energy based. So we had several initiatives. We did our grid type PV system policy, and we're now at a point where we have a feed-in tariff as a utility. And beyond that, we have several small solar farms already in operation. For example, One of the projects we worked on is the Wakenham Solar Farm, which is an island in one of our rivers that we want to have 100% renewable energy supply during the day from solar PV. Outside of that, now we're executing large projects like Gaisal, as Dorval would have mentioned, where we are looking to deploy 33 megawatts of solar PV, utility scale across 8 different sites. And this is representing our single largest investment in solar PV in the country to date. So for me, my journey has been one where we started off with not really a clear direction as to where you want to go, but as you get into it, you realize that once you're doing what you like to do, you don't work a day in your life. So that's basically the little message that I want to leave with you. Find that area of focus that you think is what is interesting to you, is what is something that you can do and not become a burden to your daily life, and pursue that area strongly. I had quite a journey going through, lecturing to coming into industry, to staying in industry and still lecturing part-time. And even though the job gets tough as you go to more senior levels of management, at the end of the day, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you are advancing something that is very dear to you. And for me, that is taking my electrical engineering skills and deploying it in my little way to try to mitigate and combat climate change through the deployment of renewable energy. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm grateful for any questions that you might have as we go through today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir. And thank you so much for sharing your insights on your journey, both in industry and academia, in electrical engineering, and also, reminding us of that Japanese concept of ikigai. I think that with so many pressing issues, both globally and regionally, there is, ample opportunities for each of us to find that sweet spot where, what we're good at intersects with what the world needs and what we can be paid for. So looking forward to hearing more from you when we get to the Q&A.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Department.
So now I'll introduce you to Ms. Rochelle Johnson. Rochelle Johnson is an energy specialist at the World Bank, supporting the energy transition in the Caribbean. Prior to joining the World Bank, she served as an energy researcher and project coordinator consultant at the Inter-American Development Bank based in Jamaica. During her tenure at the IDB, her portfolio included managing a US $40 million energy management and efficiency program developed by the National Electricity Loss Reduction Plan, and advanced the e-mobility strategic framework and agendas for Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Guyana. She holds a master's degree in economics from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and is a certified project management professional, and also has a sustainability and climate risk certificate. Additionally, she is also an active member of the RMI Women in Renewable Energy program. Welcome, Rochelle.
Thanks, Dorval. I'm just checking if you're hearing me clearly.
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Well, thanks as well to the CARICOM team for extending the invitation to participate. I think as one of the, I would say maybe one of the only non-engineer parts of the panelists, my journey in the sustainable energy space has been very untraditional. So in case Dorval, I do hold a master's in economics. And after completing my master's, I reached the point in terms of, do I continue in terms of the traditional economist, which it means entering the financial sector, the central bank, or take a risk in a sense in terms of joining the utility in Jamaica as an intern on the different regulatory activities. So as you made the decision to join the Jamaica base as an intern, and immediately after 3 months, I was to work as regulatory analyst, lookers of their tariff structure and pricing, as well as to support the utility tariff filing and their rate case, which would have been the new regulatory regime. Before utility, I would say that exposed to the need with energy and economics and how impactful it is to have such a degree in the space, because it not only looks in terms of the economic impact in terms of pricing to consumers, but as well as how regulation play a very pivotal role in accelerating the or commitment towards our energy policies and goals. After completing my tenure at the JPS, I had a unique opportunity to join the IDB as a consultant. At the time, they were working on e-mobility. It was I would say, the new attraction to that draw young people to the sector, and I was very eager to play a part and to see how best I could. While at the IDB, we worked in developing the strategic for e-mobility in Jamaica, which has led to significant change to accelerate the mobility, as well as to bring attraction in terms of financing to the country, change in terms of the public transportation system, as well as for private consumers who would like an option to switch from gas to electric vehicle. We also worked in the public facilities with energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is very important in terms of helping reduce its fiscal burden in terms of electricity bill. And I think that kind of helped to pivot other projects along that similar path where we had schools all retrofitting. And then after spending 3 years at IDB, which I would say has played a significant part, significant contribution in molding me and allowing me to grow within the sector, especially as a non-engineer. It's had the opportunity of applying. Well, I applied for a role with the World Bank and was successful. So now I'm an energy specialist with the World Bank covering the Caribbean region. Journey hasn't been easy. I can resonate as it relates to imposter syndrome, especially when you're not from the technical field, but nonetheless know that the value that you have is part, and also the skill that you bring to the table will allow your colleagues or your see a unique and a different perspective. So I would say my journey in terms of the line of being a traditional economist has definitely led me on a path and a journey that I'm grateful to be a part of, not only helping my government of Jamaica to advance its energy policy targets and goals, but also to work with other governments within the Caribbean country or the Caribbean region to also advance their policies. So in a nutshell, I would say that has been fruitful, and I look forward to encouraging other persons to venture outside of the line and to see how best they can play in accelerating sustainable energy within their own ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle, for bringing that non-engineering perspective to the discussion. Sustainable energy, the transition, as we know, has many dimensions beyond just hard engineering. There's also the economic and the social dimensions. An important question is, how are we going to pay for this? As well as, ensuring that we leave no one behind. So I'm looking forward to hearing, what really motivated you to take that risk, but we'll get to that in the Q&A session. So now I will introduce our fourth panelist, Mr. Antonio Seeley. Antonio Seeley is a registered professional engineer with a decade of experience in the sustainable energy sector. He began his career as a graduate engineer in Barbados's beverage manufacturing industry. He also spent 5 years at Barbados Light and Power Company as a systems engineer. He played a key role in the implementation for Barbados's first electric bus project and later ventured into independent consultancy. Currently, Antonio serves as the Regional Electric Mobility Advisor for GIZ, working on the NDC Tech project, a collaborative initiative aimed at promoting sustainable transportation across the region with partners like UE, CCRI, CDB, and Climate Analytics. Welcome, Antonio.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? Just testing the audio.
Yeah, we can.
Great. Thank you very much, Derval, and thank you to CARICOM for giving me the opportunity to, speak about my journey in sustainable energy and in a lot of ways, sustainable transport as well. I feel like I'm rounding up the the engineering side of things, but that's okay. So yeah. So when I was thinking about doing this presentation, I was thinking about where does my journey in sustainable energy start? So I was going to start the discussion at my final year at university, but I'll give a little background before then. So I would say in secondary school, similar to what Sapphire might have discussed and also Amir, I was also strong in physics, and math, and those types of subjects and the technical subjects. So I had made a decision sometime around full form that I would be pursuing engineering. Funny enough, prior to that, I had a dream of being an architect at the time, and I think that probably stemmed from my dad's career. He's also a draftsman and did a lot of drawing and designing houses as a lad, so I maybe was perhaps influenced by that. But it wasn't until I did a study trip to Trinidad in full form as part of the mechanical engineering CSC group, geometrical and mechanical engineering drawing, and that group, we did a study trip to University of West Indies in St. Augustine. We did industry in Trinidad and stuff. So I made the decision to do engineering at that point. I don't think that I had the idea of focusing on energy at the time. I think that came later on and in my final year. So that's kind of where I started the discussion. But engineering was a decision I made very early, and everything that I did from class 4 going forward was to pursue and become an engineer. So a little bit into the journey. So started at UE, beverage manufacturing, utility, and then some consulting, and now working for GIZ. So to start off, my final year in engineering, I had the opportunity to do a summer internship prior to that final year, working with Sol Caribbean. And even though that is not necessarily sustainable energy, they're fuel marketing. I know they have a sustainable energy arm now. It started to open up my mind and interest in the area of energy in general. And in my final year, I would have chosen to specialize in energy and power systems as part of my mechanical engineering degree. And it would have been a combination of traditional energy in terms of power plant engineering and stuff, but it also had courses in energy engineering and renewable energy. And that's where I started to get the initial trigger or interest in sustainable energy. And to that end, where I would have opted to do a design, build, and test of a device to harness energy from a frequently open door. And so if anyone is familiar with University of West Indies and final year projects, they vary from the most detailed research projects on industry with a particular company, or like some very novel, interesting, curious types of projects. And I think I went on the more novel side of things with this trying to harness energy from a frequently open door. And you can see the interesting device that I would have designed there at the top. So going into get a job in energy immediately after school. I would have applied to numerous opportunities and stuff, but the one that came up first was the opportunity to be a graduate engineer for BHL in Barbados. And during that time, the focus of the graduate engineers is on energy, well, not energy efficiency, but efficiency improvement. So how do you save money, save utilities, and save, just be more efficient for manufacturing? So the projects were not focused on energy per se, but there were a few projects that were energy related. So I had the opportunity to do work on a boiler fuel efficiency project, steam and hot water recovery, and CO2. So the focus there was just trying to save these critical utility resources for beverage manufacturing to just save operational costs, right? So that was another initial trigger. Then the opportunity came up to be a trainee systems engineer with Barbados Light and Power. And I think that this is where a lot of my sustainable energy experience, interests, and a lot of my detailed work in renewable energy and sustainable energy, particularly electric mobility, when it came about. So when I entered the utility at the time, the big conversation at the point in time was this 100-100 vision. So this was the renewable energy and sustainable energy targets for Barbados. That was a directive from the utility at the time. It was not necessarily driven in the same way from the government. As yet, this was the vision of the utility, seeing and understanding that renewable energy, electric mobility, and these things will be a big part of the future. And how do we prepare as a utility to be able to support this future transition of the utility? And through that work, I had the opportunity to work on a lot of key projects. One of my favorites was the electric bus project. And reason that was one of my favorites is because it was a good synergy of achieving climate and sustainable energy targets, but also improving with the efficiency of transportation, helping to save money for the taxpayers of Barbados. So that was another keen and interesting one that I would have worked on. After this, I would have gone into some consulting, and at the oh, okay, sorry, let me take off the video. I just saw that I am freezing. CARICOM. Sorry, I'm switching over. Yes, is this audio better? Yes, is this audio better? Yes, is this audio better?
Yes, it is.
Yes, hello?
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, so at the time I would have had the opportunity to work on various projects, feasibility studies in Jamaica, feasibility studies for electrification for the government of Barbados, and they also got to work on the project management of upgrading the electric vehicle charging network in Barbados. And last but not least, my current role is working with GIZ as a regional electric mobility advisor on the NDC Tech project. And we are looking at implementing sustainable transport in 5 different countries in the region, ranging from policy support to actual demonstration projects. And yeah, that's the current work that I'm supporting, and we'll save some time for questions and answers. So that's my journey, and happy to answer any further questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Antonio. And it was great to hear about your journey in the EV sector. We know that the electrification of the transport sector is a major component of our low carbon development. So now we would like to bring back all of our panelists on screen for an interactive session. And I also invite members of our audience to drop your questions or comments in the chat. so that you can be part of this conversation. So I want to start off with you, Rochelle. And you mentioned about taking that risk to, as an economist, to go and work with the regulator in Jamaica in the utility space. So can you share a little about what really motivated you to take that risk, which was wasn't the conventional path for someone in your track, coming from the economist field, and there were many other options, but you decided to go that route. And we're very glad you did, but we would like to hear, what inspired you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let me backtrack a little as I didn't touch it in my journey. So my master's was actually sponsored by the Central Bank of Jamaica. It meant that I had to do internship with them. After doing internship, I realized that this wasn't particular for me, not in the sense that I wasn't passionate about it, and I know touch a little as it relates to finding what you're passionate about doesn't mean that it's what you're good at doing. And then the utility had a opening. They had an internship program and they were looking for persons with an economics background, and I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And that was when I was open to the idea of the synergies between economics and energy, especially as it looked into the pricing mechanism. You need to ensure that you are not over subsidized. And as you had touched on, Derval, the social issue, how do we ensure that those who can't afford it still have access to electricity at an affordable rate, but at the same time to ensure that the company is viable. So working in the tariff space, it broadened my horizon in terms of how regulation, as I stated, plays a very important part in advancing the sustainable transition. And that kind of led me dig a little deeper and wanted to understand a little bit more as it relates to regulation and other aspects of the energy sector in terms of could play a big part. As I said, the IDB, they were looking for a consultant. Again, it so happened that everyone is looking for consultants with an economic background. And because I had taken the risk to venture on the non-conventional path, it meant that I was in a very unique situation where I was one of the youngest person in the energy sector who had an economics background, and therefore could take the risk of being a consultant. Giving up a full-time job for a consultancy isn't usually what someone would do. But I really wanted to understand, I really wanted to grow. And I think, especially when you're young, especially when you have no dependencies, you should give yourself that chance to take the risk, especially if it's going to put you on a different path. And so working with the IDB, originally the role was to focus on the strategic framework for e-mobilities. And I know Antonio touched a little bit on that as well. And that also allowed me to work on different projects within Jamaica that the IDB was supporting, in terms of the energy management project you read as well, which looks at the retrofitting of public facilities. We touch as well as on different regulatory activities. One of the things that utilities, in Jamaica that struggle with is losses. Again, that goes back to a social issue, which it means therefore that the regulation needs to be developed in a way that not only the utility has a role to play, but can support in terms of the social aspect. So I would say that how I got started was really just, and it paid off. As I am now World Bank, again, working in a similar role and in governments to meet their energy targets and goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. And I'm going to turn over to Antonio. I know you gave us a brief overview of many of the initiatives that you have been involved in, even from being at UE. But can you share or zone in on one specific project that you worked on that contributed to advancing sustainable energy?
Yes, sure. Like I think I mentioned it a little bit, the electric bus project in Barbados was a very interesting one. The reason I like that is not only because it was the first electric buses in Barbados, so I get to tell my kids that I was part of the implementation committee for the first buses. It was because the project was like of the synergy of climate change, um, efficiency in transport. There was an immediate need and a desire to get public transportation improved in Barbados. But then it was also an economic benefit. So the ability to have the synergy and convergence of climate change objectives, savings to the government and taxpayers, and then also the opportunity to improve and change the experience of the traveling public was a good project. The next project I would want to highlight would be this current NDC Tech project that I'm working on. The reason I think it's significant is because it touches numerous countries in the region and is covering a wide variety of areas from policy support, NDC revision, but then also actual demonstration projects.
Thanks, Antonio. And I know we spoke about the importance of youth, leading and driving this energy transition. And I would love to hear from you, Sophia, in terms of what you believe to be the most impactful way that youths can influence and accelerate the energy transition.
Sure. So for me, reflecting on this question, the first thing that comes to mind is youth advocacy. And I think that we've seen in recent times how young people have really claimed and created spaces across various levels, global, regional, national levels, to really have their voices heard, particularly as it pertains to climate change and the energy space. And I think that this is really critical. But I think especially observing how that kind of space has emerged, I think as young people, we have to be really careful with the risk of tokenism. I think sometimes young people are invited into these spaces and their voices are heard, but we're not really a part of the decision-making processes and really driving the transition forward. So for me, apart from advocacy, which I think is important, we do need to have our voices heard, especially I think as young people from small island development states who stand at the front of climate change. But I think beyond that, I think it's really critical for young people to be involved in the technical work, whether that be engineering, economics, or the vast amount of sectors that come into the energy transition. I think that we have to take up space as professionals. We have to take up space as entrepreneurs within our organizations. Recommending new ideas, pushing new ways of doing things, and also as entrepreneurs. I think young people have, immense potential to create innovative business models in the energy space, to have businesses that really penetrate the market, and really drive the transition that we want to see. So in my view, I think one of the most impactful ways young people can influence the energy transition is to be a part of the transition, to put our hands to the plow and to actually do the work.
Absolutely. And I would love to hear your take on this also, Amir, in terms of, youths influencing the transition.
I think Sophia and I have the same notes here. No, but she hit the spot. She hit the nail on the head. Advocacy is very important, and the risk of tokenism is something that we need to guard against. In my progress or my trajectory so far, I started off with an environmental twist as an engineer, being part of an environmental youth group here in Guyana. And that is one of the main things that kind of drove me towards the thinking of being able to use my engineering skill set to help this environmental issue. And that is what merged to get me where I am right now. But getting us directly involved in not just the decision making, but the doing what we need to recognize is that in 10 years, 5 years from now, the young people who are being trained and taking opportunities now are going to be the ones doing things in 5, 10 years. So it's important to recognize that we need skills across the field. We need the economists and the engineers, but we need the technicians as well. We need the vocational skills, the technical skills, and the policy skills. Everything needs to come together. So what we can do is prepare while we're advocating as young people, use the time that we have now to prepare ourselves to take this charge over in the next couple of years, because we have to be the ones to do it in the future. So the sooner we recognize something like this is the better it is for us to move this process forward at our pace. Because the frustrating thing is sometimes, I'll tell you, my major project, GAISOL, I've been at GAISOL since 2018, Dorval. And it spanned 2 government changes, right? And you immediately recognize the complexity that comes with. And we're still here. We're implementing now. We're at execution. We're putting boots on the ground right now. So like being able to be part of that process and holding that process is very important to me. And I think that is one of the key things that we need to do, is take that sense of ownership and be ready to actually get it done when the time comes. And the time is actually now anyway. So
Indeed, the time is now. So Antonio, what challenges have you encountered as a young person working in?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so first I will start by saying that I think I was blessed with a lot of opportunities. So from the perspective of challenges, I think a lot of the challenges that I faced were along the same lines of seeking to make changes. So change management as it relates to the approach to how things were done in the past, to how they need to be done to achieve a lot of the sustainable energy and climate change goals. If you look at a lot of the technology approaches and stuff that are required to achieve a lot of these goals, there are a lot of new ways of doing things compared to the conventional ways. With that comes the disruption of businesses and how people were accustomed to doing it. So one example, working within the utility, as you could imagine, the whole concept of changing the way that we generate, transmit, and distribute energy is a whole disruptive thing to business. So as you could imagine, as a young person coming in, seeing persons that were working in this profession for years and years doing things a particular way, and then you're coming in suggesting to do things in a totally different way, that comes with a lot of challenges, as you could imagine. And that, to me, change management is one of the biggest things, but it's also one of the biggest opportunities, in my opinion, because without discrediting someone that has a lot of experience, the good part that where youth come in is that because a lot of things are new, you don't necessarily need the history of experience to pursue them. So I think that is the distinct advantage that youth have as it relates to approaching a lot of the challenges and things that come with sustainable energy, is because they're all new. So it requires retooling and relearning for a lot of persons, but now it is fresh learning for you as a youth. And the mindset that you come in with, to me, is advantageous because you're not, I don't want to say traumatized, but in some ways traumatized by the history of how things were done in the past. So to me, that's my approach. It might be a challenge, but it's also opportunity.
Yes, I agree. I think as Caribbean youths, we often face the notion of, paying your dues. But I think one of the valuable things that we bring to the table is our adaptability and the ability to grasp, new and emerging technologies, and even being able to mentor up, even persons who have much more years of experience, which is also valuable, but we have to find out a way to bridge the gap. So Rochelle, what skills or knowledge have been most valuable to you in your career and in your efforts to support the energy transition?
Yeah, thanks, Darrell. So the first thing I would say is that it all, and you won't know it all. The good thing is that you will have peers that you can always turn to. So I would say the two main helpful in my efforts to advance the transition is one in terms of project management. I know Amir touched on it, and we do need to recognize that projects within the Caribbean is different from projects within the developed space. We do need a bit more time. Stakeholder engagement is also critical to ensure not only the government, if they are your clients, understand the project, also those who will be affected by the project. So I would say having certified in project management has been very helpful. It helps me in the sense in terms of understanding the risks. Times we have a grocery list in terms of things that needs to be done in the Caribbean, but we also need to understand limitation in terms of resources for us to effectively utilize the resources that we have to achieve what exactly we can do in a very timely manner. We have projects sometimes, especially working in the development field, where projects are extended. And because sometimes the design doesn't take into consideration the nuances within the Caribbean, and that things need a bit more time in order for us to execute. That has been one. And secondly, I would say networking and mentorship. As Antonio said, I think you, Derval, in the sense we're mentoring up, but also you need to mentor down. And networking, you won't know it all. It's not your job to know it all either, because you have other persons who can fill that role. It's your job to go to them and to understand from them and to learn, but also not negate the fact that it's your responsibility to have the technical knowledge that is required, as well as the different know-how in order to execute the job that you are hired to do. Mentorship, such as even like the Women in Renewable Energy for the Caribbean, has allowed me to have access to a lot of other persons influential within the Caribbean, as well as technical experts. It also helps you to see, okay, how can my career path look differently? Where can we collaborate? What are the synergies? And we know in the Caribbean, sometimes it's who you know in order to get stuff done. So even now in the role of the World Bank, where we have this Caribbean Efficient and Green Energy Building project. And it's a regional project, so therefore it spans 3 countries so far, the Guyana, Senegal, and Grenada. As well as we have 2 regional entities playing a role, the OECS Commission and SICRI. Now, I mean, if you are not from the Caribbean, you might say, okay, all you're doing is just meeting with your counterparts, you're meeting with your clients. And in order for you to get stuff going along, it means that you need to have that relationship. So I guess I have an advantage by tapping into networking groups such as WIRE, but also being familiar with persons within the Caribbean to help to kind of advance the different stages. So I would say from my experience and from my role, 2 skills that have been very useful is project management as well as networking/mentorship. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. And bringing Sophia back into the convo, as you work to transform regional systems, how do you stay informed about the latest developments and innovations in the energy field?
Thanks, Derval. So I think there are a number of ways that I try to stay abreast on what is going on. I think LinkedIn is one thing that I use just to see all the latest reports that are coming out from various organizations. I think it's helpful to give you kind of a snapshot of how the sector is developing. I think in addition to this, as Rochelle mentioned, I think networking is really powerful as well. You know, speaking to colleagues in different organizations and slightly different fields, I think it always helps to get their perspectives and learn about what they're doing. I always find that really helpful. Attending conferences is another one. I always, for example, look forward to attending CREF. I think conferences like that really give you a good understanding or a snapshot of what is happening in the region in different countries, and you can really learn a lot. For me, it's something that I continually want to do a bit better at. I think in my current role, especially when we're trying to attract grant financing, for climate change projects. The focus of these institutions is most times on mature technologies because the risk is lower. So they're most times looking at things like solar and wind, things that they can essentially trust. But I think there is always room for these more innovative solutions and looking also for financing for those is a part of what my unit and my organization does. So that's just a bit from me on how I keep abreast.
Thanks, Sophia. So as we look forward, Amir, what are your long-term goals for your involvement in the energy transition, and how do you plan to achieve them?
Well, right now, I think I just need to get these projects done and get them commissioned and flip that switch at the end of the day and then think about what comes next. No, sometimes when you're operating in a project space, I see Rochelle smiling, she understands, and Anthony coming from the utility, you understand. Sometimes when you're super focused on something like a special project or a project that is large, you don't look too far ahead. But that being said, I think for me personally, what I've recognized is as an engineer, having project management experience, electrical engineering experience. I think my next step is now to bring more policy into my expertise. I'm actually thinking about something along the lines of development economics, energy policy. I might be crazy enough to do a PhD, I'm not sure. It depends. I've been telling myself that for the last few years, but then I recognized that my master's was in 2016, and that's quite some time ago. But you know, I definitely see myself continuing in this space in over the next years. I want to continue to be on the ground as much as I can, doing as I mentioned earlier, implementing these projects and putting my shoulder to the wheel to advance our targets as a CARICOM state.
Thank you, Dr. Amir. And you know, we're talking about sustainable energy, and it's not in a vacuum, as I mentioned in my introduction. You know, it's all part of building climate resilience, even as we mitigate, you know, our impacts. But as a region, our focus is really adaptation and resilience, and energy is important for that. So I don't see any questions in the chat. But I must thank our audience for staying on with us as we are a little bit over time. But I will now invite all of our panelists to give us some closing remarks, some brief closing remarks on, you know, what message they can offer us to addressing climate change and advancing the energy transition in the region. So I will go in reverse order, starting with Antonio.
Yes. So my parting message would be, so a lot of us that are working in this space, we are already converted. We already believe in the sustainable energy transition and climate change. I think the parting message is being able to translate the benefits beyond the climate change and sustainable energy initiatives. I think most of the time when I'm having conversations with key persons on sustainable energy projects, their interests are not necessarily only aligned in that area. And given that we work in this space, we are all probably wired similarly as it relates to believing and understanding in sustainable energy and climate change. So I would say that an important thing, especially as a youth, person would be to be able to seek to translate and show the benefits and why we're doing this beyond just the climate change and sustainable energy goals. And I think that that would bode well in helping us to get further and accelerate the transition.
Thank you, Antonio. Rochelle?
I agree with Antonio. I think for my parting words, it will really be, as Antonio said, we're already in the sector. We're already aware in terms of the different benefits. I think we need to do a little awareness outside of the sector, outside of the energy sector, in the sense where younger age, in a sense, from kids coming up, sharing it can be as small as, what does it mean when we produce, I mean, that's a very rigorous in terms of, energy via fossil fuel, but, turning off the lights when not in, has that simple action has a significant impact when we accumulate. So for me, I would say that awareness plays a very key role, and we start, the better, because as Amir said, it's the future generation will help to drive this change. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rochelle. Over to you, Amir.
Sure. So I want to pick up on both Rochelle and Antonio's words here, because one of the things we have to recognize is that we're talking about sustainable energy, but the faceted approach or the outcomes from this are so many. For example, we're talking also about energy independence. Sustainable energy and renewable energy allows us to have, as a region, energy independence, to remove this dependency on external sources of energy that drives everyday things in our lives. The cost of our electricity in each of the islands in each of our countries, skyrocketing simply because of what's happening in another part of the world, and the fossil fuel supply chain has been disrupted. So bringing in that extension of benefits and making it more real to the man on the ground is key, as Antonio would have mentioned. And then going further than that, ensuring that the upcoming generation also has this appreciation of why we're really doing this. This whole discussion about equality, equity, and justice with regards to what is happening in our region, where we as a region are feeling the effects for things that we have not necessarily contributed significantly to. So, instilling that sense of urgency and continuing to instill it by allowing us to recognize what these everyday impacts are to our lives, by making those connections easily for the people who are out there, who are not in the space or on the periphery of the space, to understand exactly why we're motivated to do what we do.
Thank you, Amir. And Sophia would close us out.
Thanks, Derval. So I think in terms of a message that I would give, I had my notes were very much in a similar vein than everyone. I think that as we communicate climate change and the energy transition that's needed, it's important for us to just communicate what's logical when we really look at what we need to do, I think, from a sustainable development perspective, from the environmental development perspective, economic development, social development, the energy transition just makes logical sense. So when we look at the economics, it makes financial sense where we're seeing in the trends, many renewable energies generation sources are now becoming cheaper than coal and gas and oil, for example. When we look at the environmental side, it makes sense in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to mitigates against global warming, but there are broader environmental benefits, for example, cleaner air. And when we look at the social dimensions, it also makes a lot of sense. It makes sense in terms of job creation, in terms of energy justice. And so when we look at it from just a logical assessment point of view, we take away even the emotions of it, which are really important because we feel the impacts of climate change. What we're seeing is that it almost is illogical not to pursue the energy transition and not to address climate change. It would be counterproductive on our part as a society. So that's the final message that I would leave.
Thank you, Sophia. Yeah, it just makes sense. to pursue the sustainable energy transition. But before we close, we do have one question in the chat. Just to aid younger ones completing our MSc in renewable energy management field and gaining experience and also interest in renewable technologies to keep us involved in the field. So for example, this webinar will help, but to reach out to us and make information available for us to share and be part of, what other ways can this be achieved? And I will throw this on Amir.
What you'll find, I think it's follows, yes. A lot of things are happening in this space. And what you would need to do is start to follow some of these entities. There's the CARICOM that does energy report cards for each country on an annual basis to keep the region updated as to how each of these countries in the region are transitioning. There is the work done by CARICOM Energy and the CARICOM Secretariat. There's the work done by the 5Cs. All of these entities have accessible platforms, whether it's on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or their websites even. So where I would start is to start by, subscribing to them and getting an understanding of what they're doing, and then start to digest their information from there. But then go beyond that. If you find that you're looking for something and you're not exactly finding it, reach out, make the effort to, be bold enough to send an email to Dorval or send an email to whoever, make that effort on your part. And you'd be surprised that, you get a response and you get a whole new line of information opening up to you in this regard. So look out for what is already there. There's a lot of information in the space. There's a lot of entities doing work, but also if you find that there's something missing, you can very easily try to go direct as you need to.
Thank you, Amir. And just from today's session, I can safely say that the Caribbean sustainable energy transition is in good hands. I am really delighted to be in good company with professionals from across the region doing their part to carve out climate resilience and also energy independence, as Amir said. So I want to thank our audience for being with us for today's session as we kickstart the CARICOM Energy Month webinar series. Be sure to stay tuned to CARICOM's social media sites, and we look forward to you joining us for more webinars. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to the audience, thank you to CARICOM Energy for this opportunity, and do enjoy the rest of your day. I would like to invite all of the panelists to stay on screen for a group shot on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.